So you get to listen to me for the next 15 minutes.
The next item on the programme is a combination of speakers, and they're going to finish with a panel. Okay, so we're pleased to welcome both Daniela Prataviera, okay, Nicholas Edwards and Margaret Twelves to form a panel to answer questions on careers in TESOL. Daniela and Nicholas are both currently working in English language teaching management in 2 separate schools in Leeds. Daniela has experience of teaching English all over the world. She completed her MA in 2015 and is currently a director at MDA College in Leeds. Nicholas is an academic manager at the Leeds School of English, and he is a person you need to pay attention to, as he has not only been hiring people, but he has also been hired as an English teacher, so he has a wealth of experience as well. Margaret has a management position at Melton College at the University of York, where she has a special responsibility for developing group courses, and Margaret has managed schools in the Asia Pacific region. So I don't think we could have a greater combination of people to listen to and share their experience with us, especially when it comes to work as an English language teacher. Okay, Daniela and Nick are going to start us off. So thank you. Okay.
That's right. Okay, so welcome. We'll change up the conversation from students to teachers a little bit. So our section's going to be in our talk's going to be in 4 sections rather. So we'll start with talking about the UK language school market, then about employability, interviews, CVs, looking at then breaking into management, because that's roughly what you guys are gunning for, and then some anecdotal advice, so from not only us, but from the teachers that we work with as well. Okay. So we'll start with a bit of an overview of the language school market here in the UK, which is quite different to the markets that you might find in other countries, such as Asia Pacific region that Margaret's going to speak about. So in terms of the kind of contracts available, so generally, depending on where you look at, they tend to be more short-term contracts, less stable contracts. Progress for teachers, so what roles are available within different centres, and then progress for students as well. Generally, working in other markets abroad, you tend to find there are courses where students progress through levels on a basis of time served rather than progress made, which you tend to find less of in the UK. Qualifications expectations, so in certain markets the qualifications expected for an English teacher are quite low, and in the UK, especially because of the accreditation system that pretty much all the language schools here have to adhere to, the qualifications needed are much higher. Class sizes and dynamics, so obviously if you're working abroad you're much more likely to encounter monolingual classes, monolingual groups, whereas here in the UK it's very rare to find monolingual groups unless you're teaching on a very specific closed group. They tend to be multilingual. They also usually tend to be a little bit smaller, again depending on which centre you're working at. Materials and exams, relatively similar. It's more the motivations for doing those exams that tend to differ. And then the business objectives. This we'll look at a bit more in the management section, but it's something that, especially working in small centres, can have a big impact on the type of work that you do. Okay. So the 3 workplaces that I'm going to talk to you about are ones that I have particular experience in this country. So year-round language centres, which are the kind of centres that me and Nicholas run, summer schools, and then also university courses. So you can see the difference between them in terms of types of students, contracts available, pay and conditions, and then some different peculiarities in each centre. So especially with these two, the year-round language centres and summer schools, one particular thing that you need to get your head around is continuous enrolment. So it's not something that it's not something that a CELTA or a Masters will necessarily prepare you for, but you as a teacher need to accept that new students will join your class every Monday and finish every Friday. So your planning has to be flexible because the students that you teach on a week-to-week basis will change. And that's how pretty much every language centre and how every summer school manages to stay afloat because of this way of working. With the summer schools, they tend to be more short-term, they tend to include accommodation, there's expectations of activities and supervisory work that you wouldn't find in a language centre where it's mostly adults. And for university, which generally seems to be the holy grail of work in the UK, it's incredibly competitive. Students go up against, other people with PhDs, much more teaching experience. It can be very lucrative, there can be really high paid roles, there can also be very part-time, 0 hours work, and there's usually some kind of research expectation that isn't present in the other types of centres. So again, it's hard to generalise because of how varied the market here is, but these are roughly kind of the management structures that you find. So it may be that there's a principal and then some kind of director of studies, academic manager, and then there's maybe a senior teacher and then teacher roles down at the bottom. Or in a much smaller centre, it could be one manager that's responsible for all of the teachers, and that's the only management structure. Whereas in a bigger centre, you might find that there are full-time teachers that are considered above part-time teachers, and that could vary the kind of roles that you have. So I briefly mentioned accreditation, and the big accreditation for the UK is the British Council, and something that anybody working in any centre has to come across at some point. So the standard for the British Council is that the academic staff team has a professional profile. What this means is a mix of TEFL I and TEFL Q. So once you complete a master's degree, you are considered TEFL Q. So you're TEFL qualified. It's looking at the kinds of specialist courses that might be run, the kinds of experience, the different age groups, and evidence of extra training. One of the first British Council accreditations that I did at MDA College, we got a negative point because there was no evidence that a teacher teaching a private class had ever been specifically trained in doing one-to-one teaching. So that's something to consider, is that they will look at everything that you have done before. And then this is, in all senses, appropriate to the context. So us as managers and accreditors will be looking at, have the teachers done something similar to this before? And your understanding of the objectives. What is it that we are trying to achieve?
Oh, thank you very much. Hello everyone. Are you familiar with the game show Family Fortunes? Yeah? Okay. We're going to play a quick round of Family Fortunes. I'm going to put you in teams. That half of the room you can be a team, please, and then this half of the room you're a different team. So I did a survey of the top five qualities that management are looking for in a CV or a cover letter for a potential EFL or ESOL teacher. So in your team, I'd like you to think of what are these top 5 qualities. They'll be ranked, so the most important, the most popular will be first and will win you 5 points, and the least popular will win you only 1 point. Okay? I'll give you 2 minutes to confer with your teams. Between 1 and 10. Can you guess what number I'm thinking of?
6.
It was 6. That's uncanny. Well done. Very good. So your team right. What do you think? What do you think was in the list of top 5 qualities? And when I say qualities, I mean things, attributes, points, information, anything like that.
Experience.
Ding! Relevant experience. That's right. 5 points. Very good. Team left. What do you think?
They've got a B on their CELTA.
They got a B on their CELTA. I'll give you that. Yeah. Not necessarily that they got a B. Oh, obviously, the better, the higher, the more preferable. But yeah, a CELTA or a Trinity ESOL qualification. Yeah. And depending on the institution, sometimes a Delta as well. Team Bright.
We get 4 points.
Okay. Team Right.
Does that count as qualifications?
Yes, yeah.
Flexibility.
That is not on the list, but it is very important. Yeah, it's something that has come up in discussions. Yeah.
Is it linguistically correct put together? Like grammar,
Linguistically
language.
correct, like well written without
Yeah,
mistakes
so they
and
don't
things
have
like
like
that.
full stops in the wrong spot and they have capital letters and they should be capitalized, that kind of stuff.
Wow.
That didn't come up on the list of top 5, but it did come up in conversation. Obviously, mistakes on your CV are terrible. Yeah, but yeah. Team Right.
Is that 100% again? Proficiency. Language proficiency.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, for non-native speakers, you mean they've got the proficiency, or just in general good?
Just in general.
Just in general good English. Again, didn't come up on the list of the top 5, but yes, it's come up in conversation. Team Left, I'll give you one more chance.
Relevant experience.
That was number 1 on the list.
No, let's go with mine. I'm quite confident. Any experience with any second language acquisition?
So do they speak
No.
language?
That did not come up either. Okay, so number 3, believe it or not, was availability.
Oh, I believe
Flexibility.
that.
When can you start?
Flexibility. That's what we say.
Well, okay.
That's what we meant.
Reflection.
Next was personality,
Oh, we know.
or like any clues that might indicate that that candidate would fit in, personality-wise, into the class. The last on the list was other important skills. Here, IT skills are really important. In other countries, a driver's license came up as being really, really important. The last place I worked in Spain wouldn't take on teachers unless they either had a driving license or committed to doing their driving test in Spain. Yeah, they even turned down a Delta qualified teacher because they didn't have a driving license, believe it or not. Yes. Flexibility in general did come up as something important. Obviously, their general English skills, how well is their CV written, of course, important. Having learned a second language or being bilingual, of course, that has its own benefits as well, but not in the top 5 list. So going to the top thing, relevant experience, do you think that experience is always necessary? Do you think that employers are always looking for an experienced teacher?
No.
No. Not always. Again, it depends. Some schools actually like inexperienced teachers because they want to mould them, and they want them. They don't want them to come with their own preconceived ideas. Because experienced teachers, experience is very beneficial, but you can also sort of come in with your own ideas about what you think is right. And some employers don't like that. They like fresh off the CELTA, the more impressionable. Is the CELTA always necessary as well, as a CELTA or Trinity TESOL? But do you think it's always necessary?
In this country or in general?
So I asked people from abroad and this country, so both.
Not abroad, yes, in this country.
Yes, okay, yeah, in British council schools definitely, but some places maybe in Far East Asia, no, not so much. And in terms of progressing and going into management, it's not even necessarily always that important. My senior teacher does not have a CELTA. She has a master's, and because of the nature of her master's, she has enough supervised practice so that we can demonstrate that it's equivalent, but she doesn't actually have a CELTA. Okay. Other things that increase employability. So I'm going to start a sentence, and I'd like you to try and finish it with what you think is correct. So other things that make you more employable as a teacher. First is knowing the local... Huh? Nope. This is for not the UK, this is for employers abroad.
Customs.
Language. Knowing the local language. Sometimes preferred, sometimes not. You were saying that it wasn't always a benefit for you, but in Europe it is sometimes preferred. Willingness to accept less than favourable circumstances. Yeah, for example, 0-hour contracts or in-company classes that start at 7:30 in the morning for an hour, and then a break of 8 hours until your afternoon class as well. So, you know, these timetables are not the nicest, and so if you show willing to accept this, and employers like that, obviously. Show an interest in getting...
More experience.
Involved. Show an interest in getting involved. So getting involved with the clubs, the after-school activities, the social program, marketing events. Something I did a lot in Spain was go to local fairs in the surrounding towns, and I'd stand there and hand out leaflets and smile and say, look, I'm a British person, you might get taught by me if you come and get classes. Appreciating wider... This is a bit of an exercise in collocations, isn't it? Appreciating wider, first letter I. Issues. So like sales and marketing, how the school does its sales and marketing, and sort of appreciating how that impacts on teaching, that's important. Appreciation of continuous enrollment, so that's it's a bigger issue that sort of impacts on your teaching, sort of appreciating that or understanding that makes you more employable, more attractive as a candidate, and flexibility finally. How am I doing for time? Okay, yes, so this is really important as well, that this is something that comes up in employment a lot, obviously. So what are your thoughts about this? Native versus non-native teachers. What are some of the issues that you know about, and what do you think about them? No, maybe it's a bit too much of a controversial issue.
Well, they both have pluses, and they both have things that make it difficult for them.
Indeed, of course.
You know, the non-native teachers understand what problems their children are going to come across when they learn the other language. So they can teach, you know, to help them get around those issues.
Of course. I mean, it goes without saying, everyone knows there's pros and cons of both, aren't there? Some native speakers, you know, they have advantages that non-native speaking teachers don't, and vice versa. Unfortunately, a lot of employers don't really appreciate these things, and so up until very recently, it was very common to see ads that say native speaking teacher required, or native speaking whatever required. Fortunately, it seems that people are fighting back this, fighting against this injustice or this unfair situation. A lot of ads will now say, they'll be more specific. They'll say, teacher required must have C2 in all the skills or something like that, or must have the Cambridge proficiency, or must have, you know, so and so on the IELTS. So, you know, that's getting a bit better. I don't know if any of you are members of any of the Facebook forums for trainers. You know, there's the Salter and Doubter trainers forum on Facebook. There's so this comes up a lot online, and it's really refreshing to see how people are resisting this now. And they're you know, people are saying it's not fair, it's not right for you to advertise for non-native, for only native-speaking teachers. So I think the tides are turning. But what's the biggest problem in this with this whole issue? What's the main cause? It's the students or the clients themselves. So students from certain countries will insist that their school provides them with a certain profile of teacher. So that's the message you get time and time again from employers. Oh, sorry, you know, we have advertised for a native speaker because that's what our students want. Well, that may be true, and you know, it's going to take some time for, you know, the understanding to reach them and for them to realise that actually there are pros and cons to both. So hopefully with time things will change. However, there are some countries that are, you know, the biggest culprits of this kind of bias. So schools in South Korea, schools in Russia, China, schools in Saudi Arabia, a lot of them, the customers, the students are very particular about the profile of their teacher. So it's something to think about when you're looking for teaching positions abroad. Consider that you know, schools out there might be more picky about it. Schools in Europe, less so, and in Africa as well, if anyone's ever interested in working in Africa, there doesn't seem to be the same level of bias against non-native teachers. Okay, I'll hand you back to Daniela now.
Okay, so just before, so this section's all about breaking into management. So it's I think the way we were talking about it was you basically become such a good teacher that you don't do any more of it at all, and you do human resources instead. So just before I put up the slide, we'll do a bit more group work. I want you to think about what makes a good manager, and also what makes a bad manager. Okay. Which might be a bit more fun to talk about, to be honest. If you have particular experience of teaching in an English language setting, whether that's in the UK or abroad, think about the managers that you had there. What made them good or made them bad? Or if you are a manager yourself, look deep within your soul and think about what you are. Okay? So I'll just give you 2 minutes just in your groups. Good managers, bad managers. Okay, let's start with the group at the back on this side. Start with the group on the back here. Okay, so good managers, bad managers. What qualities do you think?
Communication skills.
Communication skills. Lovely. Group over here. Can be for either category, whichever one.
We talked about understanding, so like understanding the position the teachers are in, kind of, you know,
Okay,
have that
yeah.
empathy and sympathy.
So we could put that as sympathy or compassion, yeah. Okay. Group over there. Good managers or bad managers?
We got it done good, so
That's good.
knowledgeable.
Yeah. in
Subject
just their
knowledge.
subject,
Yeah,
or as a
subject.
sort of wider?
Wider
Yeah.
subject, they've got to inspire confidence through their knowledge.
Wider subject knowledge, and what was the second point?
Confidence.
And confidence. So let's add a few to this bad side, just because it's looking a little bit empty. I'll take from anyone in the room. What qualities, especially in an ELT setting, do you think a manager could show?
Monolingual?
Yeah? Why do you think?
Well, because they don't have experience of learning other languages. They just, the whole connection of what it is you're trying to do. And you're dealing with a multilingual situation. I don't know, it's just like a general skill. Personally.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of monolingual minus the compassion that we talked about here, maybe then.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting point. Anybody else, something that would be a bad quality in a manager?
Lack of confidence.
Yeah. Put minus confidence.
Oh, lack of organization.
Yeah.
That's always a good one.
In life in general.
Did you say organisation? Was that organisation?
Yes, yeah. Sorry, my handwriting's a bit rubbish.
Unreasonable expectations.
Oh, go on,
Ooh.
define.
So for example, I know when I was teaching in Japan, a lot of the management, they were straight out of business schools. They had no kind of comprehension of language teaching. They were in it from a purely business standpoint, so they were just looking to make money and not kind of looking at the impact on the teachers and the students. So they were like, students have to be at this point by next week, and it's like, that's impossible. But
Yeah.
basically that,
Yeah, so I've extended that out to not ELT focused. So this idea of business versus academia, which when you get to positions like mine or Nicholas's or Margaret's is something you spend pretty much all of your time thinking about, because ultimately it's got to be a viable business. You've got to make money, but you also have to teach in the best way possible. So I mean, I've just tried with this simple drawing, just showing a little bit of the problems that you can have in academia in this particular area. Depending on the size of your organisation, being in academic management could be a relatively straightforward position. So you could do, the academic management, so syllabus design, assessment, student progression, all of those kinds of things, maybe a bit of teaching as well. So when I've worked in larger organisations, the DOS and the ADOS have also teaching responsibilities. However, my job title specifically is Operations and Academic Director. So I do things like academic management, operations management, marketing, project management, and also financial planning. It's there where you have to think about what your personality suits best. Because for people who don't want to think just about the business, or don't want to think about it at all, then maybe working in a smaller organisation where that's going to be a part of your job description isn't going to suit you. There's no right or wrong answer, and there's no better way. It's about finding the kind of organisation where you can manage in a way that fits what you like to do. Because management can be quite stressful. You go from being one of a group of teachers where you have all the camaraderie in the staff room and you get to talk to each other like, oh, isn't such and such student a bit of a nightmare? Yes. How are you teaching this grammar point? And you're sharing things, to suddenly being the only one who is in charge of all of that. And you can't, share necessarily your issues with the teachers because they are now your employees, and you don't necessarily have the support from the management up above. So it can be quite stressful, and I think I spoke with a couple of other managers as well and asked them what kind of questions do they wish they had asked themselves before they got into ELT management. So things like, do I want to stop teaching or at least stop focusing on teaching? In my role, I don't teach at all. And sometimes I really miss it. I really loved teaching. That's why I did my Delta, that's why I did my Masters. But I don't do any of it at all. And I don't really think about it on a day-to-day basis because that's not my job. How do I deal with groups of individuals? I feel like ELT as an industry attracts a lot of people who are quite individual. They like to be kings of their own castles. And sometimes when you have a group of people who like all working on their own, and suddenly you have to be like, well, we all have to do this thing together in this way, you get quite a lot of fight back on that. How do I take responsibilities for other people's mistakes was an interesting one. This came from one of my friends who's running a language school in Italy, and said that a big part of her role is she tells the teachers to do something or she gives out instructions. It's not done, but then she ultimately has to bear the responsibility of that when it comes to speaking to her managers. Because you can't just, you know, dob something on the teachers, you can't throw them into the line of fire. As the manager, you have to take a little bit of responsibility for things that aren't done. This one I think is useful for sort of life in general. The do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? You know, sometimes I think as a manager you have to know which battles to fight, and that can be something that's quite difficult if you're new to the role. Is there any questions that people, especially anybody who is managing currently, would like to add to this? Do you want to add anything? That was a very slow no. I'll pass over to you. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
So, as we said before, we talked to the teachers from our own school a lot. We talked to one of our other colleagues who's a DOS in Leeds and other friends we have in the industry, and we tried to gather together anecdotes for finding work, you know, top tips, advice, or we asked them to share their experiences of finding jobs in ELT, both in the UK and abroad. So I thought I would share some of them with you. The first one is actually my own. I moved out to Melbourne about 5 or 6 years ago because I had a friend who lives there. I had been teaching for a while already, but I didn't go out there with any idea of what the jobs market was or what I was going to do or anything really. After the jet lag wore off, I printed out loads and loads of CVs. I googled English schools in Melbourne, found a list in the CPD in the centre, and I just walked around Melbourne all day handing out my CV saying, I'm a teacher with experience, I can start immediately. And I sort of towards the end of the day, I handed CV into reception, and then about 5 minutes later I got a phone call from the DOSer saying, oh hello, I love your CV, can you teach tomorrow? I have a class that needs covering. And I ended up working there for 5 months. It was a lovely place to work, and I've had similar success with the old-fashioned paper approach. Go into the school with your CV on paper and hand it to someone, preferably the manager or whoever deals with hiring. Make a good first impression, say hello to them, and maybe it would be an opportunity for them to show you around, and then you build a little bit of rapport, and that's worked for me 3 or 4 different times. So I think that's quite a good thing to do. I think it was you or someone from MDMA, MDA, who said a lot of getting jobs is a lot about timing. So you can have the best CV in the world, you can have tons of experience and qualifications, but if you are handing your CV out right now in January in the UK, you're not going to get very far because there's just not very much work going on. Any school that has, you know, year-round classes, they will have core members of staff already in place, and they're probably not looking for anyone. It's quite a quiet time of year for all-round schools. The lead up to summer is the best time to be getting or looking for work in the UK, both for all-round schools, some schools and universities even. So timing's a big part of it. In Europe, a lot of schools operate on a similar academic year to here, so they're hiring, you know, from May throughout summer, looking for teachers to start in September. So you know, consider that. You know, you're probably not going to get a job if you inquire sort of like in April, because they've got all their staff members already. So wherever in the world you're looking for work, try and consider the timing as well. That's really important. Oh yes, one of my teachers rather well, one of my teachers said, look for desperate looking schools. They're desperate. If they're advertising for immediate start, it means they really need a teacher, and they would probably be less picky about who they get on board. So that's sometimes a good way to get in. Yeah, especially if you are not very experienced. Schools that need someone immediately probably won't worry about that so much. One of my other teachers said, "Fake it till you make it," which, you know, sort of is good advice in life, really. You know, if you're starting your first teaching job, even if you have done, you know, a CELTA or something else, you know, it's very scary, and sometimes we are just sort of faking it until we know what we're doing. I certainly felt like that when I started in management. Actually, I kind of thought, well, I don't really know what I'm doing here most of the time, but yeah, if you seem confident, then most people will just believe what you say. It's not a problem. Are we out
Yes,
of
I'm
time?
just aware that we got Margaret to speak, and also, you know, people might want to ask specific questions.
Mhm.
So because we are coming towards.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's fine.
Thank you, Daniela.